All right, so the program involves police officers who come in who want to get specialized training, and they're going to be the ones that are more likely to go to the calls when the consumer, that's what they're called, the person who they're going to be responding to if they don't know if they've committed a crime or not, they're a consumer. And if it is a mental health consumer or someone with a disability, they're more trained to handle those situations.
Well, say a little bit more about that terminology, because I'm not familiar with it.
So,
how new is it?
Right. So if you call someone a criminal, I don't know. I really don't know. I like the terminology because you have to call this individual something. Citizen, I guess you could call
Suspect is not really appropriate.
Yeah, because they haven't committed a crime yet. Let's say you're a family, your child is having some issues, you're afraid he's going to run into the street or cause some harm. He's not a criminal, but he is someone who's going to consume the services of professionals, right?
Well, the older word, I think, was subject, right? You're a subject, and when you have that encounter with a police officer, he views you in a proprietary way, as if sort of he owned you and you were his subject. You were suddenly subject to his power.
No, I get what. That's of your attention, the subject of your attention.
Well, yeah, but consumer sort of suggests a change in relationship between the officer and the member of the public. Could be someone with autism.
Right. It's the person that you're serving. That's your consumer. Right?
So in this conception, Dave Buck of Chattanooga Autism Center, the officer is viewed as a public servant, right? He's held in a very high regard on that point.
Right. These men and women are coming in and they are seeing a situation that could possibly escalate and lead to something violent, something problematic, or lead to a crime. And their job is to de-escalate that situation. That's the main goal.
Well, all right. Escalate is to go up. De-escalate is to make come down. Okay. And of course, an escalator at your Belk or your department store is not straight up. It's not an elevator. It's kind of it's slow, right? There's an angle. It's like a staircase. It's just moving you up. So what does de-escalate imply? How is it done?
Right. And so if someone is in a state where they maybe don't understand what's going on in the situation, if you're confused, you're scared, you have a higher likelihood of reacting aversely. And if someone can make you less scared, provide some trust, then you are going to become more calm and you are less likely to either become violent or louder or belligerent or do something wrong.
Well, is there something that could be done in the way police officers today are dressed? They're all beefed up with armor plate. They have the yellow handled taser on one side. They have clips of ammo on the front. They have an automatic pistol or a pistol that is an automatic on the other hip. They have nunchucks. They have other equipment on the webbing.
You have nunchucks?
Well, maybe not. Maybe I'm reaching for the wrong word. But is there not something that would be, as in other countries, as in Scotland, for example, where the officer is not a military man? He, in fact, really is more of a civilian. He just happened to have a kind of a mild uniform. What about that in the way of reducing the sense of threat and terror that the officer, I think, it brings automatically to most people if they're sane?
I don't know. I would think it's more of a cultural thing. If you teach a child to be scared of someone in uniform, they will do that. And we have kids who are sometimes scared of the fire department. They come in their special outfits which protect them from fire. And the way that you can reduce that fear is bring your children to the fire department. And we've got a program where you take the kids to the fire department, but instead of running the big sirens and the loud noises, someone with sensory issues, they're not going to like that. How can we have it in a nice, calm situation? You can do the same thing with police officers where you are more and more exposed to their officers in their garb with their whatever they wear that day, and you'll reduce that fear. It's just habituation.
Well, de-escalation, the idea of de-escalation is to personalize that sudden interaction between a man who represents the law and law enforcement and the statute and the individual who has maybe, I don't know how we describe that in short, but has maybe irrational perceptions or interruptions in what we would call common and ordinary perceptions like that my listener might have. Okay, so de-escalation says, okay, we humanize that new relationship between these two people. What is involved in this humanization process? How is that done? What happens in the course, the 40-hour course that the Chattanooga Autism Center and other groups are supporting with these officials?
All right. So when the course, I guess I should go to the first part of the question, which was like, what is going on in that situation to humanize the individual? And I would say you can narrow it down to trust. If you see that person who is next to you as someone you can trust and you believe that they're to help you, that's going to de-escalate the situation. So then you asked for the week-long course, how do we help the officers better able to do that? The officers are brought to different facilities where they can meet and talk to people with mental health diagnoses, autism diagnoses, and they are talking to professionals who work with those individuals. They have professionals coming in and talking about different mental health issues, diagnoses, what to expect. And then we go through the process of how do you build that trust in a nanosecond or in at least a very short amount of time, but also, and hopefully it can, if it takes longer, it takes longer, but you need to establish that right away.
Well, all right, let's talk about posture. What in posture can the officer do to reduce distrust and fear?
Yeah, so we talk about an open posture versus a narrow closed posture.
Describe that.
So I would say, and this is where I need the help of my officers to talk about the tactical issues, like how do you keep yourself safe? You don't turn your back on individuals, but then also keep an open posture. And they do a really good of describing that. So when I say, hey, be open, then the other officers will say, well, you can't turn around or you can't get down on your stomach or something like that. That would be really submissive. No. And just opening up a little bit. We've also taught
maybe sitting down next to the person.
There you go. There you go. So either getting on your knee or sitting down, but keeping the right amount of distance. So, and knowing your surroundings. If that individual does do something that they shouldn't, you have the ability to react to it. So they're taught both of that.
Well, trust, you establish trust. What kind of things are said? What is the type of language? What is the type of vocabulary? What is the tone? Be more specific.
Sure. It really goes down into listening. If you are listening to the individual and the individual can see that you're listening and hear that you're listening, that's the...
Well, how do you show that?
So when the individual, let's call them the consumer, they are maybe being very vocal and verbal and they're telling a story, instead of saying, yeah, but besides that, I need you to do this. Listen to the story, summarize it, repeat it back. That's called reflective listening. And also, for just a second, try to feel how that individual feels. Oh, that would make me really upset, or I'd really feel put out if that were me. And take a pause. And if it's in that situation, that individual is probably going to say, you're the first person who's actually taken a second to listen to me.
Well, I think that's really important, Dave, because listening takes time, and time is one of the main planks of policing reform. Which, if my listener hasn't been following this subject, according to Chuck Wexler from the Police Executive Research Forum, would be the use of space, time, cover, and de-escalation. So de-escalation contains, of course, those elements, but having time, being willing to give time, not thinking that you have to rush off to the next traffic stop or the next drug bust. You think, this is a human being. He's an innocent person. He's clearly got a problem, and I'm here to help him. If you have that attitude, you're willing to... Well, but then I guess the question is,
I think you hit on it. That's what the officers, bosses who are in there, their supervisors are saying.
They're saying you have to give time.
The time. It is okay. We are going to support you.
Why do the supervisors want the officers to give the time? Why suddenly is time something that they can give when previously it wasn't something that was available? What has changed in the thinking in policing?
I didn't know it was a change. I mean, I've been doing this for 5 years, and that's the thing I keep hearing is take your time. We'll support you. If you've got an issue, don't worry, we'll back you up. Take your time.
Even if an encounter lasts for an hour. I mean,
we've had some 5 hours. There's a person about to commit suicide, and they just take the time. They don't like, oh, we're going to tase you. They took the time. Yeah. There's an incident with a gun.
But that implies that the officer cares about the life of the individual.
I think it is that true? Not only that, yeah, everybody in that room that I teach, when we talk about these things, they're shaking their head. Yes, I want to help that individual. That's the feedback that I get in that room when I'm teaching.
So they have these officers who take this voluntary class. They have an empathy, and they're just learning how the empathy that you're teaching them, Dave Buck from the Chattanooga Autism Center, how that empathy really can work with their compulsory obligations as officers. Right? They represent force. They have a military bearing. Most of their training is on the use of force and self-defense and so on. You're saying this element of the use of time and patience has to be part of your job. You can't just tase the guy and say, okay, we're going to take him in for on some hooked up charge.
Yeah, and it seems to make sense to them too. Like, they have to first come in and see, is there a danger? Sorry, he's telling me to eat the mic, and I should be better at this. Okay. I should know by now. They first assess, is this person training a weapon on me? Or again, I'm not an officer. I don't know what to say, but they've assessed that the situation is safe. And then they're given the green light to take your time.
And they're making that assessment without having done a pat down, because a pat down automatically, when you're forced to turn around and so on, that automatically is hostile.
I have not seen... So when we do our scenarios,
The cop can't
they do
pat
ask
the guy down for a snubby in his pocket.
I don't know. We've seen where they've asked them. I've watched the officers come up and we tell them to role play like it's in the situation. I've had them when the role player was doing something with his pockets. He's asked him to turn his pockets inside out, and he did it in a really nice way. He's gained some trust and rapport for he's done. They didn't yell at him to do it. But then we go on to the practice, where we're doing the reflective listening.
Well, say something about how people who have autism we have numerous reports of them being killed. There are several high profile cases. I just want to mention one of Arnaldo Rios, who was the caretaker, who was shot lying down on some ground. His hands were in the air, and an intensely autistic man was playing with a toy truck, and the cop said, well, we thought that was a gun, and we fired, and we hit the wrong person. Well, and then there's another case in Oklahoma City, Miguel Sanchez, who was shot in the chest and also tased. He had a pipe in his hand. He was autistic, and he was also deaf. And the cops around him who had their guns trained at him were not hearing the people nearby saying, he's deaf, he's deaf. And, pipe in hand, well, he had the pipe because he used that to keep off dogs in the neighborhood. So there are two cases, and we have human beings shot. We have firepower carelessly displayed by these courageous officers. Dave, what about autism? What does autism do to make a person unsensible of the potentially lethal relationship that the officer brings with him in an encounter here in Chattanooga?
Right. And
tell us about autism.
So a person with autism might be high functioning in a lot of areas. They have a great vocabulary, very skilled in certain areas. But oftentimes you'll see there is a social skill issue. They might say something that will come across as rude or disrespectful or too literal, or just doesn't make sense in that situation. It's not how another person would respond when being talked to by the police. And so if the police perceive that as the person is trying to ramp things up, not being disrespectful, or they're hiding something, I could see them going in a different direction. But once the officers understand, hey, this might be a possibility, then they're going to revert to their de-escalation training and let that roll off their back.
Well, we're putting a lot of burden here, Dave Buck, on the officer. How is he supposed to know that this person is autistic? There's no sign that people wear saying, autistic person or autistic, consumer.
Yeah.
How do?
And it's funny that you mentioned that. There's a program that's getting instituted where parents or adults with autism or mental health issues or any kind of disability can get into a database and get these special stickers. I believe it's called Spark. Oh, sorry, Skylar, if I'm going to get this wrong. But you can ask for that, and then the police officers will have, in certain situations, a prompt to let them know. Secondly, you can do some training by going to the places like Orange Grove and Joe Johnson and working with people with mental health issues, working with people with autism, talking to them, and you'd be surprised at how quickly it starts to perk up people's ears or the radar comes up. I wonder if that person's on the spectrum. Teachers are getting really good at that now. And so many other people are like, oh, I think I see what's going on.
This program, Dave Buck, is voluntary. What can you tell us about the numbers of officers who might have taken it in the past year? I have a question to Matt Lee on this side. I don't have the answer back, but what do you know? Can you give some kind of guess as
here's
the
my
numbers
guess.
Per year?
I would say every time I do it, there's between 25 and 30 people. It's either twice a year or once a year. Sometimes it's once a year. Usually it's twice a year. So if you kind of do the math, 9 years out, that's how many people have gone through it. And it's not just the county and the city officers. We've had Georgia folks go through it. We've had Collegedale. We've had UTC people go through it. 911 people come down. We modify things for them. I mean, it's just really growing. Everybody's getting included.
Well,
and corrections too.
Well, okay. That's. I think my listeners are excited to hear that. This is good news. And by the way, if you want to read Jim Hammond's brief piece on this, go to Nooganomics.com. I reposted something that he has on the Sheriff's Department website. It's a Crisis Intervention Team, CIT. Well, let me ask Dave Buck about the CIT. There seemed to be the training of police in America is very you might say pro-gun, pro-violence, pro-death, pro-personal defense. In other countries, it's completely the other way around. There's almost all the trainings, like master's degree level training on treaty making, discussion, psychology, de-escalation, and a much smaller component on the use of the pistol or the taser. How we have, it seems like these are very small numbers. I mean, you're glad to have them, and my listeners glad to hear that so many officers have taken this class. But it's overall 500 officers in the Chattanooga Police Force. That's a very small number. What are the prospects of pushing for fundamental change in police training in the academy here in Chattanooga?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that it's each year you see this wider and wider-eyed individuals coming to the class. They respect it. They're finding out that they're respected officers when they're done with it. And so I feel like they are affecting the other officers that they work with, and they're taking the lead. People want to be like them. And like Wexler in that article that you'd shown me talks about a culture change. I think that's what we're witnessing over the last decade, is this big cultural shift where we're not going to do things this way. This is the way it is now.
And I think the fact that we have digital media and everyone my listener knows has a smartphone, you have a way of recording. So there's kind of an external pressure against state violence against people who have not done nothing deserving of capital punishment. And that's what we have. We have every year about 1,200 Americans, men, women, and children shot down or tased to death by law enforcement. That's a remarkable figure. And there are ample evidences of this state violence against people, again, who've done nothing worthy of death, and yet they make the wrong step, they say the wrong thing, they raise the pipe, and they're slain. And there seems to be in your work, Dave, a real desire to have mercy extended, to have patience granted to people who are disturbed, who are angry, who really they don't deserve death, and yet they're suddenly facing. A cop, of course, means citizen on patrol. A citizen on patrol representing the state who could kill him if he does the wrong thing. There's an empathy, I think, in your labors, Dave.
Now, in the CIT officers that I see, there is empathy. They are really coming at it because they want to help that individual. So many of them say, "Oh, I have a nephew with autism. I have a child with autism. And mental health issues, or I know a vet who has PTSD." So they are empathetic right now. They see that in the people that they are serving, and they want to help them.
And we have, of course, Dave, I've gotten a hold of you because we had last week an interview about the mental health court, which is a very favorable development for people with autism and others. What can you say about that?
Oh, I'm not aware of it.
Well, that's a remedy on the tail end of the judicial process vis-a-vis any particular individual. And if he has a mental problem and he's deemed to be suitable for that docket, he goes to the docket of Lila Statham in Sessions Court, and then Judge Don Poole in criminal court. And it's a special docket that meets, I think, maybe Tuesday morning. And people who have these problems, maybe among them autism consumers. And so we have reforms, I think, taking place in Chattanooga that are very favorable to the individual. And we could say to peace in society, to the lack of violence in society.
Yeah, and that's interesting that's new to me. I get dozens of calls every week from families that have so many different issues, so many questions. Every once in a while, they might ask, who would I call if I need to call the police? And we talk about the CIT. But I haven't had someone talk about their being incarcerated and what do we do. I've just, in the 5-6 years that I've been doing this, I haven't gotten that call. You're expecting a lot from the listener, Dave Buck of the Chattanooga Autism Center, but should he say, if there's someone with a mental problem or a person who has autism in some way, should he say, dispatcher, I'm calling 911, dispatcher, do what? What should he say? This is what we tell our families. If, let's say you are a parent of a child with autism or you're an adult with autism and there is a life-threatening issue going on, do not be afraid to call the police. You can ask for a CIT officer and one will come. They usually respond faster. They're ready for these things. And so many of the officers have that training. They're going to be ready to help you. And CIT, what does that mean? Crisis intervention training. Crisis intervention training. Crisis intervention training. Just ask for that. Yep. Well, Dave, real quick, how can my listener find out more about your work at Chattanooga Autism Center? Right. So ChattanoogaAutismCenter.org is our website, .org. Just head there and you can send us letters or call us. And there's an event coming up to raise funds. November 18th, come to our walk and help support programs in our area. December 18th. Or no, I'm sorry, November. November 18th. November. Just go to the Chattanooga Autism Center website and find out more about that. And do support that. That's a very worthy endeavor. You, my listener, the man who matters, with great empathy and great charity for those here in Chattanooga and those like Dave Buck who help them. Dave, thank you. Yeah, thank you. David Tulis, 92.7 FM, 95.3 HD4. Thank you. And now some important announcements.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD.